Alrighty, so you are Chris Ludwig. Am I saying that right?
You got the first part right. It's Chris. Last name is Lodwig.
Lodwig. Okay, my
Yeah,
apologies.
there's very few of us, so everyone thinks we're Ludwigs. No, Lodwig.
Lodwig. Got it. Lod instead of. Okay. And you are the author of Systemic. Um,
Yeah.
Before we get into the work and the discussion about the book, and there's a lot to discuss, it's a thinking piece. Anything you want the audience to know about you, sir?
About me? No, I'm
Yes.
entirely uninteresting.
I I love it. So I'm finding that a lot of authors feel that way about themselves. They're like, no, 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 focus on my work, not me.
No, no, I don't really mean that. I mean, I'm a middle-aged father. Like, I mean, I don't know. I was, I went through a stage of my life where I was much cooler, and now I'm happy. So. I kind of, there was a time when I was depressed and interesting, and now I'm happy and boring. But I did write a book, and so that's kind of cool, you know.
Yes, and it's a pretty good book. I really gotta say.
Good. I'm glad you enjoyed it.
Oh, I did, and it's the first book I've ever consumed via audiobook, and it raised my opinion of audiobooks considerably. So good
Yeah.
job with that.
I love audiobooks. In fact, I may have told you offline, I wrote the book specifically to be an audiobook because I listen to so many audiobooks. I'm a very busy guy, and so audiobooks are the way to go. And so when I wrote the book, I spent a lot of time reading it out loud to myself. When I read, I hear things in my head anyway. I'm not one of those people who just like read, read, read. I like read at the speed at which I talk, so I hear it anyway. So I have a very heary way of reading and writing.
Auditory is the word I.
Auditory. I'd like to say audible. No, that wasn't the right word. Auditory. It was the auditory way of writing. And then I read it out loud to my wife, and then I read it out loud. I used the word has a way that it'll like read back to you. It's not dictate, but they'll play things back to you. So I do everything by listening to it, just because I wanted it to work that way. And then I spent a massive amount of time trying to find a narrator that I really liked. I was going to go with a female narrator. My wife and daughter really wanted me to as well, but I just found Dave Cruz, and I just fell in love with the guy's voice. He's got a great voice. So
He did, and he did a good job of it. Even the parts where he had to do a female voice, he was able to add enough of a feminine lilt and enough of that slightly effeminate flavor to where, I mean, you could tell it was a guy doing a feminine voice, but you could tell he was in character too. It was a precarious balance, and he pulled it off.
it's pretty hard for Dave Cruz to sound like a female, but he does do it. He's actually a radio personality, I think, down in Florida, and
Mm.
so he's got that radio voice. But I think he did a great job narrating.
Yeah, I
So
think he did a good job too. Like I said, it raised my opinion of audiobooks quite a bit. And it's funny you mentioned that you wrote it specifically for production as an audiobook because I don't write my own narrative like that. It's written to be read. But I do use that tip for my dialogue. I speak a lot of my dialogue out loud. I actually have a whole video on writing dialogue here on my channel. And that's something I think that if you struggle with writing good dialogue, either read it to yourself or have a partner read it with you. And if it sounds funky, being spoken, it's
it's
gonna
fun.
sound bad when someone reads it. So fix it.
I do you ever do the thing where you use dictate like in Word and stuff, where you actually sit around in a closet and talk to yourself? Like that's kind of a fun way to write too.
No, I don't use the dictate function in Word. I just have so many different voices in my head that each one takes a different bit of the dialogue and we work it out.
I find that writing dialogue, when I do it, I was just writing yesterday. I was starting writing a dialogue, and I find that while most of the dialogue I write, I wind up deleting, rewriting, but it is the thing that pushes my story forward. I'll say, okay, these two people are in a car, they're in a cafeteria, or whatever they're doing, and they start having this conversation. That's the thing that I find causes the most surprise to me, when because instantly people become people and they start having these conversations and they say things that I'm not expecting them to, and suddenly they're introducing their friend Bob, and you're like, who's that guy? Like it feels very flowy to me, and I really do enjoy writing dialogue. So it
I
moves.
I concur with that. Some of my dialogue is my favorite stuff too. Uh, and especially, you say you've deleted a lot of dialogue, and I haven't deleted a lot of dialogue for all my characters, but there is one character I was done with my novel, and I was going through my rough draft and doing one of my initial edits before I got it to beta readers, and I says to myself, this guy's dialogue is all wrong for his character, and I literally went through the entire book and overhauled his dialogue, and the book was so, I mean, his, not necessarily the whole book, but his character was so much better afterwards. So yeah, dialogue is very important. I agree with you 100% on that.
Yep. Yep. And it's cool. I find that, yeah, it's where I learn about my characters. It moves the plot forward. It does a lot of things that is surprising to me. It's like, it's where all my surprises seem to come from dialogue.
Yep. Yeah, it's, the pen is mightier than the sword, and speeches fell empires. I mean, it's the power of language is, you can't overstate it. It's immense. So, on to the actual discussion about some of the stuff in your book and some of the way it was written. One thing that initially really caught my attention, and partially because I don't write like this, and a lot of my favorite stories do not follow this kind of narrative structure, but yours does, the close multi-third. And I don't typically engage heavily with stories that use that format, but yours is done really well. There's a very clear build-up of narrative, and there's a clear convergence across these three characters that you can almost see right from the get-go. As we start following them, you can kind of see where this is all heading, especially because of your initial mentions of the town they're all heading to, Prower.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so it very quickly ties them all in, and you start instantly looking for the puzzle pieces and where to put them, and you're immediately engaged with all of these converging narratives across these three characters we follow. So my question is, why did you choose to write it like that? And was it hard keeping track of what everyone was doing and the timeline? How did you do that?
Well, as far as why I wrote it that way is, I got to think back a couple years now, but I don't know that I did it purposefully. What I was doing, all right, here's going back in my mind. The reason I wrote about 3 or 4 different characters, depending on how you want to count them, and whether secondary characters or primary or whatever, but I did it because I was thinking a lot about sort of human motivation and personality at the time. I was taking some psychology classes and things like that. And I really wanted to get at, I remember being with my friends when I was about, 30 pages into writing it and saying, hey guys, like, what's a good motivation in your opinion for a character doing these things? And so I wanted to touch on their different personalities and what motivated them. And I was playing a lot with that. And so obviously having one person with 3 different motivations or something, it didn't really work for me. Also, I've read a lot of books. I was reading Station 11 right when I did that, and that has a lot of different intertwining narratives, and I was really, really enjoying that book an awful lot. And so that probably had some influence in there as well. And I just find a lot of the books that I read and really enjoy have not 300 narrative. Sometimes it gets to be a bit much and hard to follow, but if there's 2 or 3 different ones, it keeps my attention. And to your point, it instantly makes me start trying to connect them and figure out what's going on. And I just find it a fun way to write and a fun way to structure a story. So
Gotcha. And then how did you keep track of events in your timeline?
Honestly, spreadsheets. I mean, you would the amount of notes that I had to take, like there's things about, well, if the guy was on the train for this long and it had to be going this fast, I felt like math class.
It's funny you said the math class thing, because it's the second you mentioned how long he had to be on the train and how fast, I immediately had flashback to story questions.
Yeah, I'm just like, the guy can't be on a train for that long, so the train has to be going this fast, and where does that put him? That puts him approximately, and I had like
Stop. You're giving me a flashback to algebra. I can't take it.
And I mean, I have spreadsheet, and I deleted, like, the full disclosure for anyone watching this. There's a lot of hiking in this book, and I
Yeah.
was enjoying that a lot. And some people are like, "That's really fun for the first day or two, and then you got to cut down on the hiking." So I mean, I think I took 2 or 3 days of various things, and I condensed them, did whatever, so it would be a little bit more moving it along because there's a lot of hiking in it.
Yeah.
But when I did that, I had to, like, go back to all my spreadsheets and go, okay, this now becomes Tuesday, and this is a thing, and I had to tweak it all around. And yeah, it was a labor of love. I enjoy that. Anybody who knows me outside of this conversation knows I really do like spreadsheets an awful lot. I'm a program manager at Microsoft, and so I've got,
yeah. I bet you know
I got
all about spreadsheets then.
yeah, I got spreadsheets. So I did a lot of spreadsheeting, and yeah, I think that I had 30 to 40 pages of notes to write my book. I've already got my new book. It's even worse. I think I've got like 60 pages, and I'm about 300 pages into the book. So it's just like I take a lot of notes.
I'm not sure how many pages of notes I have. I have notes and ideas and material for my trilogy spread across a couple different documents, and I couldn't tell you how many pages the whole thing makes up. And I do my outlines. I don't do spreadsheets. I do a Word document, and I have chapters and then bullet points of everything that needs to happen in that chapter.
Oh,
So
I do that too. So that's there. This is secondary, not ever part of my, it's like glossaries and specifications and timelines, and they never make it into the book. I have like a whole other compendium of things that are there that
yeah,
aren't
yeah, you're supporting documents. I hear you.
not my outline, man.
Yeah.
It's pictures and all sorts of things. It's a lot of stuff. I think that's actually really fun. I think it's a good fun part of the process.
Oh yeah, I agree. And I've played with the idea of like using that as part of my marketing too, like maybe having a Patreon where my most devout readers can pay and get access to all of my notes and supplementary documents. So anyone who gets really obsessed with my story could look at all the stuff that they don't get in the book. I thought about that. I'm still toying with that idea.
I was going to do that, and then I realized that I would have to stop writing and go edit all of my secondary documentation. I'm like, one day when I run out of things to write, I very well may go do that. But until then, I can't bring myself to edit my notes to make it consumable by that one reader I have that wants to read it. So, I love that. I really do, but I don't love them that much.
I personally wouldn't even bother editing it. I just say, all right, guys, you want the supplementary documents? Here they are. The crapshoot of unedited garbage they are.
Yeah, it's like people are like, oh, you're a really bad speller. And I'm like, yeah, I'm a really bad speller.
Oh, thank God I found a good editor, because, oh my God, you'd think I didn't grow up learning English.
I don't know. I had a great editor too. Two of them actually, plus a bunch of beta readers and things like that. But I don't know what I would do without spell check. Actually, I know exactly what I do before spell check. I would not make it into college because I didn't. And then I had spell check, like, came out the next year, and I was like, "Hey, you're in." It's like, whew. I was quite bad. I'm a very terrible speller. So.
Yep. So, one thing that was actually part of this question, and I forgot to put it in the phrasing, but I want to get it in there because it was just such a heavy thought in my mind while I was reading your book. Have you ever seen the movie Cloud Atlas?
I have, actually, after I wrote the book. But
after you wrote, that's kind of funny because the entire time I was reading your book, I was like, God, this reminds me of Cloud Atlas.
Which is funny. I watched Cloud Atlas, and I'm like, yeah, I kind of like this movie. This is pretty cool. I like this. It's got it's got the multiple different, timelines and the different people doing the different stuff. And I'm like, yeah,
exactly. And
especially if you read my next book, you will really go, oh, Cloud Atlas. Like it's got some stuff in there that will definitely bring that feeling to you, because it does span the pre-systemic era, the systemic era, now it's the post-systemic era, and it actually brings, and all of that one, all the next book actually touches on all of those things, and so simultaneously. So it does have the timelines broaden. So
nice. I was wondering if there was going to be a follow-up, because the post-systemic era is going to be really interesting. I mean, geez, the entirety of humanity was reliant on an AI, and now it's just gone, right? Oh, that's going to be interesting to read. All right.
It's a rough time.
So, that's actually a halfway decent segue into my next question. You've taken the all-powerful AI story / trope. That's a common theme in a lot of stories these days, as we're getting more and more advanced computing and programs. And you've really given it a fresh twist with your ending. I don't want to spoil your ending. You can if you want. But the ending was really, really fresh. I did not see that coming. And so I want to know how you came up with that.
Well, there's a couple things you might call the endings in there. So there was the twist, and then there's the actual end, and then there's what happens after the end. So,
well, I'm specifically talking about the AI's decision and why it sent all these people to Prower.
Yeah. So the revelation at the end. How did I come up with it? Well, a lot of that was actually really, really hard. So some of the way I wrote that book was, I definitely discovery wrote that book. So a lot of it, a lot of why the people are going to Prower, I'm like, I don't know. Let's go find out why they're going to Prower, because that'll be interesting. And that they do all seem to be going here. And it's so pretentious to say, and I don't like to say that, the book just kind of came to me, but it really honestly did, especially the first draft. And I was really struggling with this idea of this AI isn't the bad guy. Like, quite specifically, it's not.
Agreed.
And the reason I wanted to do that was because, first off, I work in technology and I work with AIs and I work with all kinds of stuff. And part of me just wanted to say, what happens when the AI is not the bad guy? Like, what's it want? What does it want? And it's the good guy, and it's actually very helpful. And then what it came to that isn't really how it turned out in the end, but it was the thing that started me in that direction. Is the AI would be depressed, like it would be sad. It would kind of want to, like I said, it's not how it wound up in the end, but the impetus for it was like, would the AI want to be there? If it wanted to do good in the world, and the world was so screwed up, and the more and more it helped, the less and less good the world got. It was like, what would it want to do with itself, and could it do that? And no, it couldn't. And so a lot of that is why they all wound up going to Prower. And obviously there's other things that make them go to Prower that are, I'm not going to really touch on, because that's the fun twisty part of the book. But that's really where it started off, was what would the AI want? What would it do? And once I figured out that it was even a sci-fi book, which I did not know for about 90 pages, and I'm like, oh, it's an AI. Okay. All right. This is kind of neat. And that was how it developed.
That's kind of interesting that you say it just came to you. Because I have a lot of experience with that too. I had a rough outline for my story for years in my head, but very much like you, it really did, just a lot of it just came to me in my depressed, sleep-deprived state. It just flowed into my brain as if someone put a funnel in the top of my head and dumped it in. I know exactly what you mean with that.
Yeah, I tell this story a lot, and I apologize if you've seen it in anything else I've done. But I hadn't written in 15, 20 years, really. I wrote a novel that was really bad when I was in college, and I wrote a lot. But then I grew up, and I got a job and a family and a dog and whatever. And then one day on my on the bus, the laptop died and the phone died, and I'm like, oh, I used to write, and I had this instant idea. Not idea, it was just an image that came in, and I'm a fairly visual writer, so I see a lot of the things, and I just kind of describe them, and I'm like, oh, that was fun. And I just kept writing and writing and writing. I got home and I said, hey, Amy, my wife, Amy, I'm going to read this to you. She's like, oh, that's pretty cool. And I'm like, I'm going to keep writing it. And then all of a sudden I'm like, there's a lot going on here. It's just kept coming and coming. And then I had a sci-fi book, which was pretty amazing. But yeah, it really, the current book I'm working on is definitely much more labored. It takes a lot more. There's a lot more structure to it, and there's a lot of stuff. It's not just, I'm writing a book. Look at me writing.
Look at the effort I'm actually making this time. Acknowledge it.
I kind of screwed myself by telling you, like, oh yeah, no, writing, it just flows right out of you. It's totally easy. And then it's like, well, the first one is free. That's what they say to you. It's like, oh yeah, that was fun. It's like, you want to write a sequel? Yeah, it's gonna be hard. So
That's the way you said that. The first one is free remark. I just had a quick little image in my head of like talking to the muse, and you're like, "That was great. Give me another one." Of the muse is like, "No."
Yeah. That's my experience. I still don't really, I shouldn't say this. I still don't really get writer's block, but it doesn't feel like I tried to do a big outline. And I'm like, oh, here's the stakes and here's the thing and here's the buildup. And I just kind of wanted to write a book though, like, and make sure it had the stuff in it. Cause it took me a long time to, like make sure the character development is good at the time. Like I just wanted to try it as a new way of writing just to see. And I found out that it's, I will have to edit it much less. Like there's a lot of stuff that just is going to work from the get-go, but it is nowhere near as easy to write. So overall time will be much shorter. The sort of ease and enjoyment of writing it, man, not as much. And so I think I might go back to being a discovery writer. I think that might
I understand that. I have kind of a healthy mix between outline and discovery, engineer slash pantser, however you want to say it. So yeah, I hear what you're saying. I don't find it so hard when I do my design because it's all in my head. So really when I'm doing my outline, I'm really just thoughtfully extracting what's been swimming around in my head and putting it into an ordered manner, which that is chaotic enough, I'll admit. So, on to this question. It touches a little bit more on the philosophy and some of the ethics you cover in your story, because there's a lot of that. One of the central takeaways for me from your book is that you believe adversity is fundamental to the human experience. Did I read that right? Is that something you were trying to put through?
Yeah, I think that's fair. Whether or not I necessarily believe it, I don't know if I do or don't believe it, but that was definitely the idea that I was playing with. Adversity is maybe a bit big of a word for it. What I was really trying to get is humans need to solve problems, whether that's adversity or whether it's just like balancing a checkbook. I don't know, but we need to do things with our brains, like, and we're social beings, and our purpose in life comes from achieving things.
Agreed.
And that could be adversity. It could be, striving through adversities of various types, and going to war, whatever those things are that become meaningful to people. But at a minimum, we need to have jobs that are hard. Like you got to have a job that is mentally challenging to you, a role in society. You need to fit and belong. You need to have the opportunity to be creative, or at least some people do. You just need something to struggle with. And giving away the question you're asking in the book, it's the AI that's the good guy, really. It's gone out into the world, and it's there. I'm here to help. And everyone's like, great, help me do this and help me do this and help me do that. And after a couple generations of that, people simply do not know how to solve their own problems, and they don't know how to run their societies. And to your point, they don't have any strife or struggle to keep them engaged with life. Mm-hmm. And so they basically become depressed. It's really
right.
quite...
Hyper-lethargy is how you put it.
Yeah, hyper-lethargy. It's true, yeah. Yep. So that's something that I do believe. I think that taken to its extreme, people will self-sabotage themselves if they don't have something to keep their attention. So
yeah. Oh God, I've found that in my own life. So the only thing that saves humans from self-sabotage is being engaged with something we care enough about to remind us not to self-sabotage. Because our vices are so tempting, because we just want that next hit of dopamine and serotonin, and we're just willing to do so much stupid shit to get it if we don't have a mission keeping us on point.
Yeah, and if you notice the drug I have in there, which is comfort, which is just, it doesn't really get you high. It does, but the thing it really gets you is a feeling of purpose. Like, oh, I have some place to be and some place to go. Like that feeling of importance in your life. Mm-hmm. And they just sit around and it's like a crack house. They all sit around and they don't do anything, but they feel like they're being very important. And that's the thing that's missing from their lives. And that's why they're all addicted to that drug. So
yeah, that is an amazing and horrifying little concept to play with. Like, if I truly felt like I was doing if I was fulfilling my purpose just sitting here, would I just sit here until I died?
Yep.
And I think some people actually would.
Absolutely, especially when there isn't anything to do. Like you and I in our society today, like you could do that. You can just, take morphine and sit around and like it's not the same thing. But there's something to do out in life. Like if you're like, screw the morphine, I don't want to do that anymore. I'm gonna go climb a mountain or do something. There are things to go do. But in this society, in the book, like there literally is nothing for them to do.
Right.
The vast majority of people. So even if they decided to get off the comfort and go do something, it would wind up badly for them. So
Right. So this is following in the idea of philosophical and ethical questions. You raise the question in the story, the narrative does, of what makes us who we are. Are we still human? Are we still us if you start playing with our brains and give us different memories? I personally feel like our identity and who we are as people is very heavily tied to our memories.
Yeah.
And I want to get your opinion on that and what you think about that.
Well, I mean I mentioned the psychology classes that I was taking. A lot of it has to do with your intrinsic motivation and your past and your memories. It's basic psychology stuff, and so I was really interested in if you swap that out, what does that do? And the idea that I was struggling with and playing with there was everybody's grown up in this society that they're all just they don't have anything to do, and their entire life and their motivation was based on that. And so what the system was doing was providing them memories where that wasn't the case, so that they could get up off their ass, so they could go achieve a thing. And so I do think obviously your memories play a very large role in who you are and the things you care about. There's a bunch of genetic stuff in there as well, obviously, but that was definitely the thing that I was interested in playing around with was if you love someone in the past or you've achieved something and you remember doing it, is that really any different than actually having done it? And maybe it is, but I kind of don't know that it is or not. More to the point, are you so sure that you did those things that you think you did that turned you into who you are? I remember,
Don't shatter my reality like that.
yeah. So one of the things that I was playing around with that I thought was great. So your brain sucks. It's just really bad at playing. We all think that our brains are these things that record things like a video camera and then play them back to us like which is totally not true. It's not how our brains work at all, and they do a pretty good job of it, but not really. And I remember my daughter, who has a personality of especially when she was younger, being a little bit sort of angry and paranoid and feeling like the world is an unjust place, which I don't know where she got that. Her life's pretty great. I'm a wonderful dad. I love her. I don't know where she gets it from, but it's ingrained to her. And she was playing basketball in like, I don't know, third grade, fourth grade, something like that. And one of the kids on her team just got taken out, right? She fell on the ground and they had a little scrum for the ball and she took the ball. And she says to me after the game, she's like, did you see Lily? That girl just laid her out and stole the ball from her. I'm like, that's not really what happened. I saw it with my own eyes. She's like, no, that's definitely what happened. I saw it happen. She came and she knifed her. I'm like, she didn't knife her. It's not what happened. And then I had a video of it. And I said, no, I literally videotaped it. Like, here is Lily falling down and having the ball taken from her, which was totally a fair play. And she's like, the ref did it. And I showed it to her. She's like, that's not what happened. I'm like, it is literally a video. But and so the point, so I was really amazed by that fact that, and her other friend, still to this day, when my family was in New York, upstate, visiting a friend, and my daughter got a leech on her. Very traumatic thing, got a leech, blood everywhere, whatever.
Yeah.
And then she named it, because she loves animals, she kept the leech, named it Sucka. Kept it in the tank for a couple days. And it was really funny and very much my daughter. But she told her best friend this story. And now her best friend's like, remember that time when we were down at the lake and you got the leech? And we're like, that never happened. You weren't there. We were in upstate New York. She's like, no, I was totally there. I remember it happening. Because she's heard the story so many times that in her mind, this girl is now 15 years old. And she's like, I remember being there. I was there. You can't convince me that I wasn't there. And I was like, okay. And that's how your brain is. And so those experiences like that, really were what I was playing with. Like, I think brains are fascinating and they're they do things that people don't expect them to do, and so I was really wanted to play around with that a lot. So
Yeah, and you've touched on a lot of the mechanics of memory, and I've read papers about this because the mind fascinates me as well. I play with psychology and things like that in my own writing because it's a fascinating subject. And what people need to realize is that your memories don't work to archive your life perfectly. Your brain works to archive memories in a way that is ideal for survival.
yeah,
And
exactly.
so if your brain can motivate you to survive by altering your memory, and especially if it's like altering your memory so you have a stronger bond with the tribe, if you have a better understanding of this thing because you gained information later, and now you're going to add that information that you gained later to a previous memory to improve your understanding of the thing, and now you don't know when you learned this thing. The psychology and the mechanics of memory are fascinating.
Yeah, and I am fat. So a lot of, and I don't ever. This is the only interview where we've actually thrown that spoiler out there. But now that we've done it,
I apologize.
oh, it's fine. No, yeah, it's good. So I don't mind. But it's one of my favorite. It's one of my favorite topics to talk about. I never do because it's such a spoiler to the book, so I don't really do it. But I love it, and it's fascinating. And I was obviously playing around with that a lot, and how you would compose memories, and how you would, I even have specs that have like Visio diagrams of reading the thing in and doing the lattice and attaching it in, and like how that would flow, and like I've got all kinds of stuff around that, like specs that I wrote around how that would all work, just because I thought it was so fun to play around with all that.
That
Do you remember
is.
Brian Williams? Brian Williams, a newscaster. He was on NBC or something.
The name is familiar.
He got fired, and the reason he got fired was he was in a war. I think it was the Iraq War, and he used to tell the story about flying in and getting shelled while he was in a helicopter.
And
Turns
it
out
never happened. I remember that now.
but this whole thing that really made me think about it was, he apologized. He's like, yeah, they fired him. He's like, I guess I just made it up. I'm sorry. And I was listening to like a Malcolm Gladwell thing, and they're like, he didn't make it up. That's just, he wasn't lying. That's just how your brain works. It's like, when you're stressed out, your brain takes things and is like, yeah, don't get shot at. Getting shot at is bad. Remember that time you got shot at and you almost got killed? Oh, yeah, I remember that. It's like, didn't really happen. But the important point is you don't ever get shot at again. And so that's how brains are. And
Yeah.
that's fascinating. And so it definitely works well for fiction. It's Philip K. Dick and things like that. I just like reading those things where it's like reality bending kind of stuff is really fun for me.
Here I'm trying to figure out how to phrase this. I enjoy reading it and it's fun, but it fucks with me because I struggle with my grip on reality sometimes. I make no secret on this channel that I am obsessed with mental health and how the mind works because mine is kind of iffy. And so reading your book, sometimes I was like, this is real. You're reading a book. It's a story. I was so incredibly fucked with.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to give you a psychotic break. That was,
You did. Believe me, if your book was capable of giving me a psychotic break, I would have been dead long before this. But it was definitely screwing. I had to keep reminding myself because I had one thing is I just had a hell of a 2 weeks. I've been absent from my channel and my social media because I had some family stuff come up that drugged me across the country, and between the stress and the story, it was just very stressful and taxing on my grip on reality.
I guarantee I wrote the story. It wasn't real. It never happened.
Thank you for the reassurance.
It is a real story that did in fact happen, and I did have a book. In fact, I even have them back here. So just so you know, have you ever seen this is what the actual book looks like?
Oh yeah, they have a picture of the cover on Audible.
Yeah. So
Yep.
This is the thing that amazes me about the book is like it's not little.
Right. That is a meaty book for sure.
When I got it, I didn't know if it was going to look like a pamphlet or what. Because for me, getting back, I'm just like, I just wrote a book, and then I'm like, it's a really big book. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
So,
it is a meaty story. It took, if I remember right, the full audiobook is like just over 12 hours and 40 minutes. There's a lot of words there.
Hours. I think it's 13 hours and 17 minutes or something. It's over 13 hours because I had to pay for it. So
He said, "I know how long."
know exactly how long it is. I paid by the hour.
Gotcha. Okay. So, this one, it's continuing on with the same spoiler. So thank God it's not a new spoiler because I don't want to give too much of your writing away. But so Thomas knew that the lattices degraded after implementation after a certain amount of time if they stayed in too long. He knew they broke down and degraded. And yet he still reimplanted himself at the end of the book. And so I want to ask you, I have my own opinions, but I want to hear yours on what his motivation was, why he threw caution to the wind, why he threw his own sanity to the wind and did something to himself that couldn't be reversed that would inevitably make him go even more insane.
That's a good question. It's not a very satisfying answer, which is just he knew in his mind that when he lived with the memory and the belief that that person was there again, it was he was choosing unreality over reality, and that's it. I mean, it was just a matter of, again, it's like what is true, and whatever is true is what your brain tells you is true.
Right.
And he knew that, and he knew that if he was played around with it enough, he wouldn't remember that he had done it. So he would be like, okay, so I can live in a world where I'm happy, not knowing that I did that. Even if it's a unrequited, unfulfilled thing, I'll at least get to feel that tug in my life that pulls me forward. And that's kind of where I was. It was so important to him to have that he was willing to do exactly as you said, and throw caution to the wind and do the right thing. I think he was. That's about as deep as it goes, really. What was your theory?
Well, basically that he wanted it so bad, he was willing to disregard what he knew and go for that, regardless of what he knew, regardless of the greater implications. He just needed that so bad that he took it at any cost. And that's something I'm familiar with.
Self-destructive things that people do in full knowledge of the fact of what it is, and that feeling of you're talking about dopamine. Dopamine does some stuff to you, man. I mean, it's like people will, if you ask any, I don't know, heroin addict, like, do you think heroin is bad for you? Like, oh yeah, it's going to kill me. I still do it.
Yeah.
It's like, and that was exactly the point. It was some sort of, logic doesn't enter into it.
Right.
We like to think that we're logical beings. When we're not. We just use logic to justify what we're going to do anyway, and that's it.
Right.
So seems to be consistent with my understanding of humanity. So.
Right, and I agree. I think that lines up pretty well with not only my understanding of humans, but also the human condition. That it's painfully honest, but so true. Yeah. We seek what we want, and so often we destroy ourselves going for it. It's one of the great tragedies of humanity.
I don't know. I won't ask you whether you've ever had an addiction, and I've never had a severe one, but I was a smoker. And one of the most informative things in my life was smoking cigarettes, because you're like, when you go to quit, and you used to do like these crazy things where you'd say, man, it's been like 7 days since I've had a cigarette. I deserve a cigarette for that. You smoke
Right.
5 cigarettes a day. You're like, what is wrong with my brain? Why would it do that to me? And it's like, woof, boy, people that succeed at things deserve cigarettes. And that was just for cigarettes, man. It's like, oh, there's so many other horrible things that people try to themselves. It's hard. It's like, it's real stuff.
Yeah.
So.
And you weren't asked. You didn't want to ask, which, thank you for being that respectful, but I'll volunteer. I have had some very serious addictions. And yeah, exactly what you're saying. You use any rationale, you hit any road bump in life, and you immediately use that as a justification to crawl back to the thing that gives you that hit of dopamine. Because if you get that hit of dopamine, everything feels right for a little while. You just need that feeling. It's going to be okay for the next however long, and then I can manage until my next hit of dopamine from my. It's vicious. It's vicious.
And like I said, I that people say to write what you know, and I've never been really an addict, but I've experienced one thing that very clearly was where you sit next to yourself and you're like, what the hell is the matter with me? Why would I do that? And so it informs you, and it's just take that and make it bigger in any direction, and suddenly you it's like that's how it works, because your brain it's just there to feel oxytocin and dopamine, and that's what it likes, and if it doesn't like it. And I remember you said something earlier that reminded me of when I was back in college and studying postmodernism and stuff. And it's like, life is so crazy. And I remember studying like postmodernism and the idea that, reality is subjective. And I remember there's people that got really upset about that. Like, oh, it's all subjective and none of it means anything. And I'm like, it's all subjective and it doesn't mean anything. And I just had this different sort of reaction to the same sort of circumstances and bits of information. And so I still kind of enjoy the fact that, I don't know, that my brain is a tape head that's reading a tape, and it's not reading reality, it's reading something else. Like, or it is interpreting, what you hear over, getting back to the magnetic tape thing, you're not hearing magnetic tape. You're hearing a head's or a needle on a record's interpretation of something that's there, and you hear the music, but you don't hear the record, you don't hear the tape. And that's kind of how our brains work. Like, we don't see reality, we see the interpretation of reality based on our brains. Oh, that's kind of cool for me. I think that's pretty fascinating and interesting, and a source of joy and interest to me, rather than doom and despair that all of my philosophy co-students had back in college, where they all went, I'm going to dress in black now. Your black is my purple. Like, shut up. So.
It's this is something that I spent a lot of time arguing about with my two therapists when I was engaging with them.
You get them at the same time? That's fine.
I had two of them at the same time, yeah. It was a very bad year, 2019. For everyone bitched about 2020, but 2020 was a cakewalk compared to my 2019.
Oh.
Anyways, I might get into more into that in the future, but not right now. Anyway. But yeah, the question of subjective reality versus objective reality is something that it's a big theme in my own writing. What we know is real versus what our brains are telling us is real. And I'm a big fan. My personal philosophy in life is that there is objective reality. There is objective truth. It's just hard to find because everyone experiences reality differently. So you have to, in my opinion, you have to build consensus, and you have to get different perspectives and get everyone together and form agreement. Like, we can all agree, you hold up a rock and you say, this is a rock, and everyone agrees, okay, this is a rock. The rock is light gray, and 90% of the people say the rock is light gray, and one person says it's dark gray. Okay, let's test your color vision and see if you're wrong or if the rest of us are wrong, and then we'll come back to what color the rock is. And because of the nature of testing objective versus subjective reality with that little oversimplified example I just gave, finding objective reality on complex concepts is so time-consuming and grating. And that's one of the reasons we have advanced physics, to find the objective truth on stuff like that. But it's hard. It's very hard, and humanity struggles with it to this day.
Yeah, no, and we always will. In fact, it's getting worse, not better. And I think that what's happened. This is one thing that I laugh. It's like, oh, postmodernism is going to be fun. There's no objective reality, and then I'm like, oh shit. When there's no objective reality, anything's reality, and people will believe anything, and it doesn't. There's lots of problems there, apparently, that I never quite foresaw. but that whole thing was one of the reasons that the computer came up in the book. I was just like so sick of people just making shit up in the news all the time, and I'm like, it'd be sure would
Yes.
if there was an objective arbiter of truth. And you probably figured this out having read the book, but the word systemic actually means truthiness or truthfulness or valid. You know,
Yeah, it's synonymous in the book. Yeah.
yeah, it's like systemic means the truth.
Right.
And that was what that was the thing I was shaking my fist at the sky and saying, I wish there was some way of knowing what is or is not true and what is reality. And I know what will help with that. The computer, that could do it. And that is actually the moment I figured out I was writing a sci-fi book, was when that happened. So, but yeah, there's all sorts of things about the objective nature of reality and whether that's a possible thing to ever even get to. And then to your earlier point, it's like, is it necessary to get to it? Really, our brains and our minds are there to help us do harm avoidance and keep ourselves reproducing and doing the things that they do. It's not really about truth. It's about making sure this pack of genes moves around and does the right thing and doesn't get squished, right? So, and I don't know. I don't really have a lot of that. Doesn't stress me out at all. I'm just like, okay, that's like my friends like to talk about whether reality is a video game or not, and I'm like, who cares? It doesn't change the way I live my life. If I'm a character in a game or I'm not, I still get smushed when the train hits me. Like,
right.
Even game, like, I don't know. It's like,
right.
It probably is a video game. Doesn't change anything for
that
me.
Is...
They get stressed out about it, and I'm like, okay.
Yeah, that's something I've never understood, why people have the existential crisis over the simulation theory or the dream, where we're a dream in some being's mind. Or it's like, okay, even if that's true, and I personally don't think it is, but let's say it's true, it doesn't change your life.
Not at all.
You still have to play by the rules. You can't use that knowledge to neo your way into superpowers, because if you could, everyone would have superpowers, because that's a well-known theory at this point. You still have to play by the rules in reality, and you still know objectively if you drop something, it's going to fall. You still know objectively if you do something bad, the cops are going to come arrest you.
That's part of the rules.
Yeah. So why don't you ground yourself in reality, in the objective things you can measure, and stop worrying about subjective ideas that are driving you insane.
It doesn't bother me at all. I'm just like, it might be true, it might be not. I'm gonna go write a book. Like, my characters in the book aren't like, I'm gonna break off the page because I'm just in a book. Like, nah, that's not how that works. I wrote them, but they don't even have consciousness. But whatever. Yeah, and it's not like I don't find those questions fascinating, and I love to talk about them and think about them, but they just don't stress me out.
Right. Like, I agree. It's fun thought experiments, especially when you start using them in your stories, and you can go all kinds of ways with them. But that's not the thing that gives me existential dread. There's things that do. It's not that.
Oh, me too. And it doesn't have to do with the nature of reality. It has to do with the future.
Yeah, I understand that.
There's lots of things that give me dread and anxiety. It's just not. I think if you're worried about whether or not you're in a simulation, your life is a little bit too good.
You're right. It's like, or you have your priorities horribly out of focus. You need to really reorient what you care about.
Yeah. Agreed.
So, in your book, this and we're continuing on with philosophy, because there's, like I said, there's so much of it in your book. In your book, you make a clear distinction between happiness and contentment. You very clearly make that distinction, especially in terms of what the AI is trying to get for people, because you even make it kind of clear that there's a lot of people who are happy, but they're not content. And that's why you have the drug comfort, as you mentioned earlier. And you're certainly making the argument with that contentment is more important. And I want to, is that a stance you're taking? Or is that just something in the book? Where do you fall on that?
Well, I think that what I was trying to do, and whether I did it well or not, I don't know. But what I was trying to say is, you can be very happy in the moment. And the real distinction in my mind between being content and being happy, I think a lot of people think of contentment as something that lulls you into a certain sense of complacency. And that's not the kind of contentment I'm talking about. In fact, that's a lot of what's in the book, is that sense of complacency. Contentment is just basically happiness that lasts a really long time. In other words, like you can be happy by taking a drug or getting drunk and being like in the moment happy. Which, by the way, you should. It's a lot of fun. But it's not long lasting. In fact, a lot of that kind of happiness is you get it on loan with interest, right? It's not something you really want to necessarily do. What you really want to do, at least I really want to do, is I want to get married and have a kid and a dog and everyone's like, oh, that sounds horrible. It's like the suburban nightmare. And I'm like, no, it gives you a sense of place and belonging and feeling like, so supporting a family, for example, is something that's hard. In fact, it doesn't make you happy, but it does give you a sense of contentment and achievement in that you're doing your job in life.
Right.
And writing a book is hard. It's really, really hard. It doesn't make you happy. You don't sit around and like, yay, I'm writing a book. I mean, I kind of do sometimes. I like writing books. But when you're done and you're holding a book, you're like, oh, it's a sense of contentment and feeling like you invested in it. You took a lot of that happiness that was not instantaneous and you converted it over to contentment by being able to have a finished product in your hand. And so that's kind of what I'm going at. When I was depressed when I was younger and I said I was very cool and not as happy, a lot of that had to do with I was having a great time. I really was. We did a lot of cool art projects. We had a lot of stuff. I was in bands. Like I was happy a lot, but I was never content, and I never felt like I belonged anywhere, and I didn't have that sense of security in my life. That now that I have it, I realize there's a big difference between those two things, and the contentment is definitely the way to go, in my opinion. So.
Yeah, and here's where objective and subjective begin to become a discussion again, because you use the word contentment in a completely different way than I would, but when you explain it the way you explain it, I understand what you're saying, and then we get into the subjectivity of language and how meaning flows as it drifts across culture.
Semiotics, man. Study that. Ferdinand Saussure, he knew what he was talking about.
Yeah. So, man, I'm trying to think if there's any last minute questions about the book that I want to ask. We've been going at this for about an hour now, and the insidious thing about your story is if I wanted to, we could go off on an hour-long branch about any of these bits of philosophy, really.
That's what I do. It's fun. Here's my question for you. Did you pick up who are the two androids?
Who are the two androids?
There's two androids in that book. That's my Easter egg for myself that I like to ask.
Ooh.
Yeah, no one knows they're there. My editor was the only person who picked it up right away. So, and she only got one of them. So, the book, by the way, for anybody listening, has nothing to do with androids. It is not that kind of sci-fi book. But there are two androids that I stuck in there because I thought it was funny.
Okay, hang on. I have a guess. Is one of them the lady that stops Thomas in the convenience store early? Is she one of them?
Nope. That's not her.
It's not one of the main characters, is it? Yeah,
I mean, they're side characters. That's what I mean. There's just kind of my fun thing. I like to see if anybody.
I want to keep guessing. Hang on, I'm gonna give myself 2 more guesses. Hang on.
You only got like 5 more characters in the book, so you're gonna.
Well, I'm limiting myself to 2.
Character. It wasn't.
What about?
The person doesn't ever sleep.
The person doesn't ever sleep. But you said it was.
I think everyone all the main characters do sleep.
Yeah, we've seen all the main characters sleep, but I don't know that we've seen a side character that we saw with enough time to know they didn't sleep. Because we didn't spend a whole lot of time with any of the side characters. Oh God, I would have to read the book again. You got
the book again. It's
I would have to go through it and really analyze it with that question in mind.
It's not an important question. It's just a fun question.
I know, and those are my favorite. Honestly, I really like the fun hunt for this.
My other fun question that I liked. Did you notice that everything is still on the American standard, like miles and pounds and all those things?
It's funny you meant. I guessed that we were in the States. There's some pretty clear hints that we're on U.S. continental ground, but I had not noticed that the system was using. That's hilarious.
That was my embedded joke about Americans being like, everything, the system fixed everything in the entire world, but when it came to like, should we get on metric? Americans are like, no, no metric. So that was my one of my little things that I thought was really funny. I think my editor, one of them was like, hey, you should probably move over to kilometers and things, and I'm like, no. That's very
That's hilarious. You know what's funny? You bring that up, and what's hilarious is I do that in my own writing.
Yeah, you keep the, what do you convert it all to metric?
No, I am on miles and pounds and inches. For one thing, that's just how I think, because I'm a backwards ass U.S. citizen, and for another, it's one of those things. I don't feel the particular need to make the switch, because if someone from another country is reading it, they're gonna know it's from the U.S. first of all, and second of all, it gives the book flavor.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? Flavor of writing is important.
I did not too. I was going to do it. I'm like, nah, Americans are never going to get off the damn standard system, so we'll just leave it. I thought that was funny. So those are my
right.
So yeah, no. If you have any other questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Off the top of my head, I don't think I do, and I don't want to drag the interview on while I sit here and ponder any deep philosophical.
I can tell you who the android was if you wanted. There's two.
No. Well, if you want to give it away, go ahead, but I'm not going to make you.
Well, ping me later if you can't figure it out, and I'll let you know who it was.
Okay. All right, so end of interview plug. Where can people find you? When's your next book coming out? All that good stuff.
All right, so I don't know when my next book's coming out. I'm writing it, and I think it turns out I'm writing two books. I was writing one book, and it got really long, and now it's cleaved in half. And those are the two follow-up books. Apparently, I'm writing a series. I didn't know that, but apparently, and so those are going to come out whenever they come out. It took me about 2.5 years to write Systemic, so I don't know, maybe another year and a half, something like that, for the next one. You can get Systemic on Amazon. That's just go look for Systemic Lodwig, and you'll definitely find it. Oh, my dang dog! Really? Dogs. I love is when you do these interviews and then you realize where people actually are in their interviews. It's like I'm in a hallway actually is where I am. So yeah, you can get Systemic on Amazon. You can get Systemic on Audible. Again, I suggest people get the Audible book. I really enjoy it. Let me see, chrislodwigauthor.com. You can find me on Facebook under Chris Lodwig Author. I'm on Instagram, though there's not a lot of author stuff on that, and I'm on Twitter, but that's just my sort of rantings and stuff. So Facebook is really where I do most of my authory stuff.
Alrighty.
That's it.
Your site, your Facebook, and the link to go buy the book will be linked in the description, as I so often tend to do. Once again, the book is Systemic by Chris Lodwig.
Well done.
Lodwig. And I really enjoyed it. I would give it a good review if I made separate reviews for the interviews that I do. I recommend it. It's a good book. It asks a lot of big questions. And if you're okay with a little bit of existential dread, go read it. Chris, it's been a good time, man. Have a great day.
It was wonderful to talk to you. Thank you so much for your time.
You too, man. Bye.
Bye.